Hello, and welcome to Cut Print That's a Review. My name is Brendon McDonald, and today I'll be reviewing 4 contemporary movies that have recently come out in theaters. In addition, there will be a section at the end of the show where I'll recommend a few movies that you can access at home.
Our lives are not defined by any one action. Our lives are the sum of our choices.
Franchises have a habit of slipping from exceptional to mediocre to outright abominable within a couple of entries, typically being caused by an exhausted well of ideas and a desperation to string out the remaining concepts as long as possible for maximum soulless efficiency. You should be able to tell where I'm going with this, but unfortunately, the Mission Impossible franchise has finally fallen into this hole as well. This presumably final film in the series is a continuation of Dead Reckoning's plot from 2 years ago, and it follows Ethan Hunt attempting to destroy the AI program known as the Entity before it completely takes control of every developed nation's nuclear arsenal and initiates a global war, annihilating the human race. Now, everyone is aware of the typical formulas that accompany this series, much like those of the similarly venerated James Bond franchise. The double crosses, the set pieces with setbacks, the worldly political conflict that threatens to destroy all of humanity unless Ethan Hunt can stop it, etc., etc. The problem this time around is that the structure of the movie is extremely interminable. It is potentially the most overlong, redundant bore fest where even the action sequences can't save it. The majority of the movie is characters delivering their exposition to the screen constantly, basically piling detail upon detail on the audience to the point where it gets overwhelming and dull at the same time. And unfortunately for us, the movie prioritizes acting like this is the most grandiose, important conflict imaginable, instead of taking some time to divert and sit down with the characters. Probably because Christopher McQuarrie and Tom Cruise have already realized that Ethan Hunt has repeated the same exact story arc over and over and over repeatedly in this franchise, and that they have no ambition to really challenge that repetition anytime soon. Now, this wouldn't even really be much of an issue if the movie were capable of structuring it effectively, but to my absolute shock, the editing of this film may be some of the worst since Mission Impossible 3. It's far too reliant on awkward flashback sequences, even to scenes which occurred literally 2 minutes previously, which was baffling to me. And the overuse of cutting to different characters' faces as they regurgitate information from their scripts is just exhausting to watch. It's not exhilarating. The direction is similarly lazy and leaden as scenes go on and on and on and on and on, with no interesting blocking of the actors and no creative way of choreographing camera movement outside of excessive Dutch angles. And one particular camera move where they employ parallax to make it seem like the visuals have a dynamic quality in a very forced manner. Don't even get me started on the horrible references to previous movies that feel artificial in every way. One particularly egregious example being a character's relationship to another character in the first movie. It's the most moronic thing I've ever seen in one of these movies. Not even the actors felt passionate about this movie. They all felt like they phoned in their performances because they were obligated to appear, especially Ving Rhames, who delivers his lines in such monotone fashion that it's no wonder that Luther is on his deathbed in the story. Tom Cruise has lost all the charm and the whimsy that his character used to inspire, and he's now just a dour, secret agent man with a conviction for saving everyone, which is such a belabored point in this movie by the end of it, that he's the savior of the world, that it makes Top Gun Maverick look comparatively humble. Comparatively humble. It's really surprising how much this movie feels slapped together and rushed in the editing process, given that they had a good 3 to 4 years to actually produce it. You'd think they would have had more of a coherent plan for how to execute it, but apparently those thoughts were drastically wrong. I'd give this a 3 out of 10. Yeah, a shocking failure of a conclusion to this series. Yeah.
I need you to trust me. One last time.
Hello?
Howdy.
Howdy.
Honey, the new neighbor invited you over for a drink at 8 tonight. I said you'd go.
You don't know my schedule.
You sit there every night. Might be nice to have a pal, you know, a bud.
With American comedies being in such a dire state at the moment, as studios either refuse to greenlight them or they focus on the most bland, broadly appealing comedic aspirations imaginable, it is very rare to see a comedy movie come out that actually has a successful combination of effective goofs and an entertaining story to follow. Friendship is one such movie. The plot follows a severely insecure and awkward marketing executive, played by comedian Tim Robinson, whose life is filled with mundanities and unexceptional relationships with his wife and his son. In fact, he doesn't even have a male friend that he can hang out with. But after a chance encounter with a neighbor of his, a charismatic but bog-standard weatherman portrayed by Paul Rudd, Robinson wants to become more personally involved as his friend and accepted within Rudd's little friend group. Robinson's eventual obsession with becoming Rudd's acquaintance leads him into ruin, both professionally and personally, leading the audience into bursts of laughter many times. As a comedy, I found this extremely successful and cathartic. Robinson's crazy, unhinged energy just bubbling under the surface and insane interjections during conversations, especially in the first scene, are a really funny reflection of the Paul Rudd weatherman and really everyone else in his life. They all have weird, unrealized sides to themselves that they often hide from each other, particularly Robinson's wife and son. But they come out in occasional doses of very, very weird behavior and speech. It's very reminiscent of a 90s comedy such as What About Bob and The Cable Guy, where the casual businessman is paired with someone far more idiosyncratic and out of his league, which is partially the reason why they're attracted to each other as opposite extremes. They're basically an odd couple. Friendship is sort of a subversion of that type of formula, while also being a satire of modern A24 style independent art house filmmaking tropes, such as the propensity to film most movies as if they were horror movies, center framing the action, unsettling ominous music in the form of orchestral strums and electronic synth, and conviction to the unhinged, hyperbolic performances. Another good element of the movie is that it's structured somewhat traditionally until the various wrenches of the plot are thrown in to exemplify the descending chaos and desperation that the Robinson character gets up to, both at work and at home. It even leads to one especially silly development where Robinson's wife disappears and everyone suspects that he was the cause of it, as he unintentionally made the circumstances incredibly conspicuous for himself. It should go without saying that the dialogue is also extremely funny, particularly Robinson's little observational deadpan quotes that range from humorous to hilarious. One that really stood out to me on first watch, among the many other laughs, was when Robinson is taken down into the same tunnels that his wife disappeared in, and he's being questioned by the authorities on what his responsibility was in bringing her down there. And his deflection to the whole scenario is just loudly exclaiming, "We both beat cancer!" As if that's an accomplishment on his part. And it's also a reincorporation of a line that he states earlier, far earlier in the movie, actually. Robinson's character is so charmingly pathetic, even to his own co-workers, that it really helps to lighten the mood of some of the more surprisingly bitter and dark moments in the script. He helps to bring a bit more of awkward likability to undercut and make palatable moments that would come across as very upsetting or messed up in a typical drama. It's a great usage of a character actor like Robinson, and because of that and many other great elements, I'm confidently giving this one an 8 out of 10. Would highly recommend if you're looking for a well-made romp. It's very funny.
There's a new Marvel out that's supposed to be nuts. We should go see that.
Death is nothing at all. It does not count. Everything remains exactly how it was. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still. Call me by the old, familiar name.
Now, critical consensus is something that I understand existing. I understand why it's a thing. Mutually shared feelings exist for a reason, and they can be worthwhile to engage with and address sometimes. However, there are some instances where you're just dumbfounded or bewildered by a critical reaction being so vehement in either direction, and Hurry Up Tomorrow is one of those instances for me. The very loose story follows a fictionalized version of the artist Abel Tesfaye, also known by his stage name The Weeknd, as he deals with a recent devastating breakup that affects him mentally and physically, inhibiting his ability to sing on stage. While running away from his concert, he encounters a strange, mysterious woman who has run away from her home after setting her mother's house on fire, and they decide to spend a chaotic, volatile, magical, enchanting, self-destructive couple of days together while evading the watch of Lee, Abel's manager, who's insistent on putting him on stage for the rest of his concert tour. This movie was supposedly written before Abel's 2022 concert incident, where he canceled the remainder of his tour due to his voice giving out on stage, but it is very clearly influenced by that event and the behind-the-scenes elements which resonated with him. It feels exceptionally personal as a work, which is definitely supported by the earnest, experiential directing job from Trey Edward Schultz, whose previous works include Krisha, Waves, and It Comes at Night. His stylistic trappings are noticeable all over this movie and are exhibited in a way that ultimately helps the movie. Notably, the camera work and the usage of lighting. The camera work is very reminiscent of all of his prior movies, particularly Waves and It Comes at Night at separate points. The first half of Hurry Up Tomorrow indulges in a manic, hyper-dynamic movement style which incorporates many revolving 360 shots around the characters to represent the elated, transcendent states of the characters' minds, as well as more of a floaty, mobile state of camera work which never finds stability until confronted with a sense of reality. This creeping sense of reality is something which helps to transition the narrative into the second half, where the camera becomes more stable, more mobile, patient, and considered with its movements, and stagnant in a contemplative way, where we actually get to experience the emotions of the characters in a more honest and confrontational way. The lighting of each scene also transitions over time from expressionistic, flaring, vibrant colors of blue and red, highlighting silhouettes, to the very oppressive and heavy side lighting that appears especially in the hotel room scenes closer towards the ending, helping to evoke a feeling of nihilism and melancholy. And you know, I see a lot of people crapping on the performance of Abel, but the performances across the board for me are pretty good. Abel has a very obviously sad streak to his performance here, but I appreciate how his expression isn't just exclusive to that one emotion. It's not. We see him go through a variety of feelings in a natural way that doesn't feel like it's pushing only for sympathy. We're meant to see him as a complex person capable of happiness, sadness, spite, anger, and eventually sincerity and enlightenment. Jenna Ortega's Anima character is positively demented and tragic at the same time, both a reflection of Abel and a representation of someone who is the archetypal love interest of someone like him. She's self-destructive, self-interested, projecting all of her problems onto others, and not accepting of the fact that she needs to change. Lee, played by Barry Keoghan, is also representative of Abel's personality, but in a more insidious manner. He's very much someone who encourages the worst instincts of Abel's personality, the addiction, the denial of responsibility, the promises of immortality and transhumanism in his personality, and the way that his character in Jenna Ortega's is developed all the way until the climactic scene. It feels very purposeful and representative of the accepting process that Abel goes through psychologically speaking. Getting to the sound design, the music is obviously very good, being created by one of the most popular musicians in the world currently, and the incorporation of one of his songs, while very blatant, does have a very affecting and sincere purpose that develops to the ending of Abel's character arc in a manner of him finishing the lyrics for that specific song. I know this is obviously being described as an ego trip, a vanity project, an intolerable exercise in self-pity, but with the combination of scripting and the confident direction, I feel like it's so much more substantive than that. I would only really have a problem with the questionable editing choices, which are off-putting, and they also occasionally mess with the pacing of specific scenes. Otherwise, I feel like this is an extremely satisfying, meditative, and transfixing abstract narrative, which is why I'm feeling an 8 out of 10 on Hurry Up Tomorrow. I would say, I would encourage you all to see it and make your own opinion on it. Try to see it on digital since it's left theaters so quickly. I really liked it.
How did you cope with Kathy being gone?
I didn't.
The A24 train keeps chugging along this year with Bring Her Back, their 8th release so far this year after Friendship and preceding Materialists, which will come out later this month. Bring Her Back is directed by Danny and Michael Philippou, the directors and YouTubers behind 2023's critical and commercial hit, Talk to Me. Now, to clarify, I haven't seen Talk to Me previously, so I can't really compare and contrast the quality here between the both of them, but I have to say, based solely on this movie, these two directors are embodying all of the A24 stereotypical filmmaking and scripting techniques, and I'm not really impressed at all by this. This movie is a competently made horror film, have no doubt, but it is also one of the least inventive, cliche, unchallenging horror films to come out in the past couple of years. The story revolves around a teenage boy, Andy, and his visually impaired stepsister, Piper, who find themselves being adopted by a foster mother after their father dies in a tragic incident. After their adoption by their foster mother, Laura, she explains that she once had a daughter who resembled Piper, but who was killed at a young age. As the two kids begin spending more time with Laura, they unravel sinister secrets about Laura's residence involving occult rituals and a mysterious child whom she also cares for, but appears to be under some kind of paranormal control. This movie, from the sound of that premise, seems very generic in the modern day, right? I can't be the only person who sees how derivative this movie is. The main appeal for going to see this movie for me was that I had hoped, you might say I'd prayed, that the visuals had as much interesting stylization as I had been led to believe by the trailer and by the shots, which I've seen publicized from Talk to Me, their previous movie. Unfortunately, they really weren't. The really interestingly directed and staged shots are more the exceptions to the rule, as the majority of this movie is dominated by very standardized shot reverse shot, handheld, or Steadicam that doesn't require much thought for clever or effective blocking. I can count the amount of shots I remember, such as the slow revolving shot around circular objects, the blood circle, and a somewhat well thought out rack focus early on with one hand. I can count them on one hand. And the performances don't support them much either. They're serviceable performances, but none of them stand out as exceptional. Apart from Jonah Wren Phillips as the possessed boy, who does have a distorted, interesting combination of sadism and vulnerability to his performance. Sora Wong does what she can with the Piper character, but I feel like she's so limited by how she's written as a character with a disability that's used as a plot device that her performance is somewhat limited. Sally Hawkins as Laura is a very obvious and somewhat obnoxiously strange foster mom lady. And Billy Barrett, who plays Andy, is very subdued in a way that I feel doesn't complement the pain that his character is going through, really. It doesn't really get us involved or empathizing with him in much of a way. The story could very much be confused for any particular bring them back from the dead trauma horror narrative, most notably Stephen King's Pet Sematary, though I will say that comparatively we are so disconnected from any of the characters experiencing the trauma and grief that their ambitions to resurrect or resolve their personal issues doesn't really have the impact of such previous stories. Not to mention that the script is so dependent on the characters being idiots or unobservant in order to accomplish its own goals of concealing the otherworldly threat until the climax, which just leads to very strange leaps of logic and pieces of information being revealed which should have been known earlier to the characters. I would like to highlight one particular missing kid poster in a certain hospital. That was really stupid as a reveal, and didn't really consider the context of some of the previous scenes that occurred in the movie. All in all, there's nothing really that special or interesting, transgressive, or enthralling about this. Though I will say that there is some intentional and unintentional entertainment value to be found in some of the drama, as it feels like it leans into comedic body horror and melodrama at a certain point that's very overblown in a somewhat funny fashion. And the ending relays a certain emotional impact that the rest of the movie just does not substantiate in the slightest. Overall, I'd give this a 5 out of 10, probably closer to a 4 than a 6. It's just a very mediocre horror movie, which I did hope it wouldn't be. I did hope it wouldn't be. If you enjoyed the brothers' previous film, you may also find interesting elements within this to highlight, but I just think it's bland. Pass.
Some people believe the spirit stays in the body for months after death. It's working! We can bring her back. Listen.
Now is the time for my video pick of the week. This week I'm going to highlight a 4K release for the film Kingdom of Heaven. Directed by Ridley Scott and initially released in 2005 to middling reviews due to significant cuts for a theatrical release, this epic historical drama recounts the fictionalized odyssey of Balian of Ibelin, a blacksmith turned crusader who journeys with his estranged father to Jerusalem in order to absolve himself of sin from murdering his brother by defending the holy city from the Eobid Empire during the Third Crusade. During his journey to salvation, he encounters the corrupting forces of religion, the power struggle over land taking precedence over justice and peace, and the value of humility. Ridley Scott brings his singular, epic, expressionist style to this 12th century conflict that results in a profound and engaging historical drama.
Do you play? No. The whole world is in chess. Any move can be the death of you. Do anything except remain where you started, and you cannot be sure of your end. Were you sure of your end once?
I was.
What was it?
To be buried 100 yards from where I was born.
And now?
Now I sit in Jerusalem and look upon a king.
When I was 16, I won a great victory. I felt in that moment I would live to be 100. Now I know I shall not see 30. None of us know our end, really, or what hand will guide us there. A king may move a man. A father may claim a son. That man can also move himself. And only then does that man truly begin his own game. Remember that howsoever you are played, or by whom, your soul is in your keeping alone. Even though those who presume to play you be kings or men of power, when you stand before God, you cannot say, "But I was told by others to do thus," or that virtue was not convenient at the time. This will not suffice.
The Kingdom of Heaven 4K release includes the Director's Roadshow and the Director's Cut on both Blu-ray and 4K, along with a considerable amount of special features that explore the concept and history behind the film, the production, post-production, release, and post-release legacy of the film 20 years afterwards. Now let's take a look at the movies I reviewed in this episode. Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning is a contrived, bloated, boring, prolonged mess that only exists to feed the ego of its central star. Friendship is a successful comedy that indulges in crazy exaggerations of mundanity to a very cathartic and funny end. Hurry Up Tomorrow is a stylish, abstract, and challenging psychological drama about the nature of forgiveness and accepting one's faults to change for the better. And Bring Her Back is an uneven, unmemorable horror and shock fest that only occasionally offers something positively provocative or entertaining for the audience. That's it for this week on Cut Print That's a Review, and until next time, that's the end of this reel.